Today's NBA is a fast-paced league rife with player movement and small championship windows. So if a team can't figure out how to make it work within a couple of seasons at best, there's a really good chance you see something change in a major way. This means most teams are in one of two situations. A win-now scenario where the team is committed to doing whatever's necessary to have the best chance at winning a championship, or the team is rebuilding and focused on maximizing young players' potential and developing a championship core. Makes sense, right? You're either all in on winning now or all in on the process of building up a championship team. It doesn't make sense to half-ass either way and just be stuck in the middle, right? Well, you would be right, and yet there are a few teams in the NBA caught in this limbo state, torn between not being good enough to compete but not bad enough to get luck in the draft, and for one reason or another, they are in desperate need of a change. In this video, I want to talk about just one of them, that being the Atlanta Hawks, who have had by far the most success in recent years out of any of the other limbo state teams. Let's dive into the good, the bad, and what needs to change. Last season, the Hawks had the 7th best offensive rating, which puts them below other Eastern Conference contenders like Boston and Philly. Even Cleveland was at the 8th spot. And they also finished with the 22nd best, or as some glass half empty kind of people call it, 9th worst defensive rating. That's obviously much lower than any contender in the league and even some rebuilding teams. The Hawks also had the 19th best effective field goal percentage, the 19th best true shooting. Most of the advanced stats pointed in the direction of labeling this team. Now, one of the biggest changes the Hawks made between the start of last season and now was firing Nate McMillan as the head coach and bringing on Quinn Snyder to fill that role. McMillan's time with the team was clearly coming to an end anyways, but the Hawks split ways with him just halfway through the season. Most with a keen eye could tell McMillan had lost his grip over the team, and there was even a report about Trae Young missing a game because of a spat he had with him. Point being, the addition of Quinn Snyder will be a big factor in the Hawks hopefully turning things around. No hate towards McMillan, sometimes it's just the wrong coach for the wrong team, but the reason I bring any of this up anyways is because since Snyder became the head coach, a lot of the players have been vocal about his presence and how he's given them confidence to take steps in their games and try out new things. And look, I don't really know shit about coaching, but it seems to me that trust and general vibes with the players can be a big aspect of the job, and sometimes all that's missing. Moving on to the Hawks roster, there's a lot of ups and downs, but first and foremost, I've got to talk about Trae Young. Trae Young is a really interesting player to me because for all of the drawbacks he has, he is undeniably one of the best point guards in the NBA. He's a generational playmaker and shot maker. He's an elite and sometimes even underrated passer. He's great at facilitating the pick and roll, and for whatever worth the intangible asset of having that dog in you gets you, Trae Young gets it. So yeah, he's that guy, and any relevance the Hawks have had within the past 5 years is in part because of him. That being said, Trae Young is a historic defensive liability, arguably the single worst defender in the league right now. And on top of that, he does struggle with efficiency sometimes. I wouldn't call him a shot chucker, and when you consider the kind of pressure he puts on the defense, it's not like he's getting open looks 24/7, so again, the shot-making ability is incredible, but it's true that his prowess as a marksman can be over-exaggerated at times. All of this to say, I'm not sure Trae Young can 100% be that guy on a team that goes to the finals, a team that has a serious chance of winning a championship. And going to DeJounte Murray because his addition to the team goes hand in hand with the skills/limitations of Trae Young, and I've got to admit, this trade made a lot of sense for the Hawks to make. On paper, Murray is nearly the perfect pairing for Trae. A talented offensive player that can shoulder the load Trae almost exclusively carried, but also a defensive pest to help make up for Trae's shortcomings. The big hiccup was that Murray was also a primary ball handler, and therefore, if they can't find a way to play off of one another, they're not going to make the Hawks any better. And now a season removed from that trade, I can definitely say that despite the bumps in the road and a similar level of postseason success, this was still the right move by Atlanta. I think. My main piece of criticism towards DeJounte Murray this past season was that his defense did fall off. Not off of a cliff, but it was definitely weaker than what he's been known for, and when he's not getting steals and disrupting the other team, his defensive presence isn't that impactful. Conversely, Murray still averaged around the same amount of points as his best season with the Spurs, and he also continued to distribute the ball well. But more importantly, Murray didn't stop Trae from getting his own on offense. His scoring average and usage rates only decreased slightly, and Trae finished 3rd in the league in assists, putting up a career-high 10.2 a game. Unfortunately, there's a big reason Trae's playstyle went largely unbothered. The Hawks just lack much depth at the guard position, so a lot of times DeJounte ended up being the substitution for Trae instead of his co-star. For a lot of the season, they had staggered playing times where Young might play all of the first and third quarters, Murray the second and fourth, and then there would be some minutes with the both of them sprinkled in, particularly near the end of games. I think it's an understandable coaching decision. Obviously, you don't want the team to lose any lead or advantage they might have when Trae isn't on the floor, but clearly that speaks to a larger problem with the rest of the roster. And the staggered method definitely limited how much we got to see of both Young and Murray, so it's hard to tell how good they maybe could be. I want to note that DeJounte Murray is a much less consistent scoring punch than Trae Young, certainly less of an offensive arsenal as well, and since he was frequently out there on his own as the team's primary guard, when he struggled with his consistency, it boxed in the Hawks bad. I don't know if Murray can be good enough as a second option the way the Hawks want. I'm leaning towards probably not, but I'm going to need to see more of the both of them in the regular season and the playoffs before I can confidently say. Okay, I'm going to run through a few more players before I get to the big one, who's the main reason I'm making this video. Onyeka Okongwu is the Hawks' backup center, and he possesses an extremely high upside. Out of everyone who played at least 1,800 minutes this past season, Onyeka was tied 4th in the league in block rate per 100 possessions. He's an elite finisher around the rim, a good rebounder, good in the pick and roll. He's a good rim protector who can also switch out onto the perimeter and hold his own. And if that wasn't enough, he's slowly developing a jump shot. I've got great hopes for Onyeka. My only caveat is that he's had very limited opportunities in a starting role, which isn't his fault, but it does make it hard to confidently project how good of a player he might be. That being said, what there is to see looks really promising. The Hawks acquired Saddiq Bey at the trade deadline last season after he struggled to fill a miscast role as the lead guy on the Pistons. But since arriving in Atlanta, he's actually been a pretty cool offensive spark off the bench, both in the fast break as well as with his three-point shooting. He provides good spacing, and anytime you can give Trae Young a knockdown shooter, it's a recipe for a good time. The only real drawbacks with Saddiq are that he's a pretty weak isolation defender, but he does have a strong NBA body and is a decent team defender, which I ultimately think is a bit more important anyways. Other than that, it needs to be said, if his shot isn't falling, Saddiq doesn't offer much and becomes way more of a negative on the floor. And lastly, Hawks rookie AJ Griffin showed a lot of promise this past season. He posted solid numbers on good efficiency, and you shouldn't put much into this, but his per 36 and per 48 numbers are pretty damn good. He's super unrefined and needs to improve as a defender, but his physical tools and the fact that he was the third youngest player in the league last season, there's no reason to think he won't continue to grow and get better. The only other person worth mentioning at this point would be DeAndre Hunter, however I have very few thoughts on him. He has decent size and can shoot the ball a bit, I guess, but nothing stands out, and he seems like an average to even below league average wing. And that brings me to the star of the video, and we've all got to savor this because it isn't often I'd say those words before speaking about Clint Capela. Look, I'm going to drop the veil here and come clean. I don't watch much Atlanta Hawks basketball, and I certainly don't hold any strong feelings about Clint Capela, but it is fair to say that the decision the front office makes concerning this man will decide the very fate of this basketball club. To get the formalities out of the way so we can talk straight business, Clint is a good starting center. By no means does he possess a high level of talent, but he's a hell of a rebounder and can anchor an interior defense. Capela is also a great lob threat and fantastic pick and roll partner. So that's all fine and dandy, but none of it's the reason why the Hawks are faced with a massive decision. Capela has his limitations, sure, but he's been an integral part of the reason the Hawks have gone to the playoffs every year he's been with them. With that being said, Onyeka Okongwu is pushing for that starting role, and it's only a matter of time before it's his. Moreover, the Hawks have Capela signed through the 2024-25 season, but Okongwu is up for an extension by next year. Now, when you consider that over the next 2 seasons, the Hawks will be paying Capela almost $46 million, and they're already going to be significantly over the salary cap, it makes more and more sense to be looking in a different direction. This process has actually already begun. Onyeka even played more total minutes than Capela, despite not having the starting role yet. And with this upcoming season being the first full go-around for Quinn Snyder, there's a really good chance he prioritizes some of the younger talent. All of that to say, most signs are pointing towards a Clint Capela trade. He's past his athletic prime, which is a huge part of his game, and the Hawks already have their center for the future. Capela still has value in a trade right now, but that could change if the Hawks wait and let his contract expire. Ridding themselves of Capela's contract would get the Hawks under the salary cap and, even more importantly, free up some space for new additions. That part is really important because the Hawks need a lot more before they're serious contenders. Better shooters, better defenders, guys that can create their own shot off limited dribbles. They just need a much better rotation for the playoffs, and that isn't going to be possible to build over the next 2 years if they stay paying Capela over $20 million a season. And if they don't, and the Hawks continue to lose or barely make a splash in the playoffs, maybe Trey or DeJounte or Onyeka, if he's garnered enough clout by then, might ask for a trade. So the Atlanta Hawks are at a fork in the road. They can choose to ride out the contract of their cornerstone big man and hope that with extremely limited wiggle room they can add a signing or two that gives them a fighting chance in the playoffs, or they can take the leap and invest in the youth. And by the way, that investment isn't particularly risky, because he might have only started in 18 games last season, but Onyeka Okongwu finished 10th in the league in total blocks, as well as 6th overall in field goal percentage. I think the moves they've made already have been another indication that Atlanta was shifting in this direction. Trading John Collins at the start of the summer, and then acquiring Patty Mills in exchange for 3 players, all helps make more room not only on the roster but for the salary. The Hawks' timeline is really weird at the moment because in a lot of ways they're trying to be competitive now, but there's also a huge youth factor to their team and some critical pieces need more development. In my opinion, they should trade Capela, maybe also someone like DeAndre Hunter or even Bogdan Bogdanovic. I know people like him and he's a good 3-point shooter, but the 31-year-old has dealt with some injuries and definitely lost a step defensively. I just think there's a decent chance the Hawks can find a solid 3-and-D guy who isn't making almost $19 million next season. And then the Hawks need to focus on developing Onyeka, not only into a starting center because I'm sure he could have already been that, but into someone who can be a true defensive anchor in the playoffs. Hopefully the likes of Trae Young can trust the process and accept the fact that the Hawks won't be seriously competitive next season. But all in all, if the team makes these moves, I think it'll be a lot better for them over the next decade even than if they were to have rode things out with Capela. They could still do that, and the Hawks could implode. Who knows? That's what makes the NBA a fun place, and definitely not an unrelenting gauntlet of dehumanizing trades, right? Anyways, that's going to be it for me. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you're hanging on here at the end. I'll be back soon, but until next time, take care.